Hello everyone. I'm going to show you the game of the century. It was played between Donald Byrne and Bobby Fischer back in 1956 when Bobby was just 13 and just starting to rise in his chess career, and this was his first game that really made him famous and put him on the chess map of the world and made great grandmasters of the time notice him. It was played in the Rosenwald Trophy tournament, which was later to become the US Championship officially, and it was sponsored by a very rich family. And it was one of the strongest tournaments in the US at the time, and there were many strong players playing, most of the American strong grandmasters, Reshevsky, Bisgeier, Byrne, etc., etc. Byrne was an intermaster, though. And it was a really strong field. Bobby Fischer ended up in 9th place, I think. He was in the lower part of the scoreboard, and he only had 4.5 out of 9, so he didn't score that well. But this game is by far the most beautiful game of chess ever played, and it could be argued that Bobby played one of the most beautiful moves in this game. Donald Byrne was white. He was, by the way, a very strong international master for that time, and he was a famous US player, and he was a formidable opponent to young Bobby, who at 13 was very strong but still couldn't measure up to strong grandmasters such as the Russian ones, Smyslov and Botivnik. But he was just beginning to get very good. Byrne opened with knight to f3, we have knight to f6 by Fischer, c4, g6, and Bobby is offering his signature King's Indian defense, knight to c3, bishop to g7, and d4, and now Bobby castles. And if Donald Byrne played e4 in this position, we would have had the standard King's Indian mainline position. But he, in this position, perhaps trying to get young Bobby out of his preparation, played bishop to f4. And that's not a bad move. It's an okay move. It's developing a piece, but perhaps he should have gone with the main line, because Bobby can't be confused that easily, and thinking that he wouldn't know this move is a bit absurd, and perhaps underestimating Fischer, who's already a very strong player, theoretically especially. Bobby plays d5 in this position, and this is now the Gruenfeld defense, one of the main lines. And after queen to b3, this is now the Russian system, or it's also called the Neo-Gruenfeld in some positions, but the Russian system in the Gruenfeld defense. And Bobby plays d takes c4, exploiting the fact that queen is going to have to waste a tempo recapturing. Queen takes c4, c6, which isn't precise. Better was to develop the bishop to e6 and gain a tempo that way, but c6 is preventing some of white's pieces from moving, and it's definitely reducing the scope of the c3 knight, so it's an okay move. White has a very, very small edge in this position, and it's mostly equal. After c6, Donald Byrne takes the center, which was given to him, e4, expanding, knight b to d7, standard developing moves, rook to d1, knight to b6, gaining a tempo on the queen, queen goes to c5, which is a very aggressive move, and you could argue that the queen was much better off on d3 or on b3, because this puts it in a position from which it could be attacked, and there were safer options. But it's a good move. It's just risky from a human perspective, because you have to keep an eye out for tactics. And here Bobby plays bishop to g4, developing his last piece. And Donald Byrne plays just a horrible move, positionally underdeveloping, and he wastes a whole other tempo playing bishop to g5. This, first of all, it does nothing, and taking the knight isn't really a strong threat. It's just that he's threatening to take on e7 if the knight ever moves. So perhaps he was thinking of pushing with d5, and then after the knight moves, taking on e7, but that really never is going to happen. And it's wasting a whole other tempo moving the bishop twice. What he should have done in this position was simply to play bishop to e2 or bishop to d3 and castle after that. But after playing bishop to g5, this now gave Fischer a chance to play arguably the most beautiful move in chess history, and this move was so heavily analyzed and praised that I think it's the most famous move by far. Bobby exploited a few things in the position, and he played knight to a4. I will explain the move later. So this is clearly a piece sacrifice. He's giving up the knight for nothing. It could be taken by the c3 knight. So the first option is, of course, to just take the knight. Now, why is he doing that? This knight on c3 is doing one thing in the position. It has one major purpose, and that's defending e4. And Bobby Fischer reasoned that taking away the defender and taking the e4 pawn would bring him a huge advantage, which would be worth a piece. And the continuations and the variations which occur after knight takes definitely confirm that. In the game, Donald Byrne declined the sacrifice. I don't know for how long he thought about the move, but he declined it in the end. And I'll just show you what would have happened. First of all, if he takes knight takes a4, Bobby would of course take the e4 pawn. And now white has a few options. The point of his moving the queen to c5 was perhaps thinking that the e7 pawn would fall. So the e7 pawn could be taken either by the bishop or by the queen. Let's just go over a few continuations. If Donald Byrne took with the bishop, then the strongest move in this position would be queen to c7, keeping an attack on the queen on c5, of course moving out his queen from the attack of the bishop. And after queen to c7, let's say black takes on f8. This would have been the best move. So bishop takes f8, and now knight takes c5, bishop takes c5. So sacrificing a queen for two pieces, and black would of course be materially and positionally better. Another option after queen to c7 for white was to play queen to b4, and after queen to b4, just retreating the queen from the attack, black would be even more winning, believe it or not, with rook f to e8, threatening the bishop twice now, attacking it with the rook and with the queen, and of course threatening a discover check if the bishop ever moves. So the best move would be, let's say, bishop to h4, getting away from the attack. And now after bishop to h4, any move wins, really, any discover check by the knight, and it's just completely busted for white. So this variation doesn't work. So taking with the bishop is clearly a bad idea. After knight takes e4, let's say he takes with the queen, which looks more promising. So queen takes e7. The winning move in this position would be queen to a5 check, attacking the knight, and after b4, blocking the check, it's defended by the queen, simply taking the knight, and after white captures the e4 knight, queen takes e4, rook f to e8 wins the queen. So this doesn't work. So taking with the bishop doesn't work, taking with the queen doesn't work. There's another possibility after knight takes e4, and that's queen to a3. That's the most sensible continuation, just getting away from the attack and trying to save the position. However, black would once again be completely winning, and the move which Bobby would have surely played is knight takes g5, just taking the bishop, and after knight takes g5, of course the rook is hanging on d1, so bishop takes, king takes, queen takes d4 check, and white has two pieces for the rook and two pawns, but his position is just busted. Let's say bishop to d3 covering the check, queen to g4 check, attacking the knight. Of course, if the knight retreats to f3 blocking the check, then just queen takes g2 wins one piece. After rook to e1, queen f3 check, and this is just completely lost. So you can see that the position doesn't work if knight takes a4. So any continuation after knight takes is completely winning for black. Another thing that white could have tried after knight to a4, which he didn't play, was queen to b4, just taking the queen away from the attack. And the continuation would go knight takes c3, b takes c3, knight takes c4, the point of removing the defender from c3, and after bishop to d2, saving the bishop, bishop takes f3, g takes, knight takes d2, and rook takes d2. And you can see that in this position, firstly, black is a pawn up, and secondly, he has a winning pawn structure, and these isolated pawns are just losing, and if you remove all the pieces from the board, black will have no trouble queening a couple of his pawns. So queen to b4 doesn't work, and Donald Byrne, after knight to a4, didn't play queen to b4, he didn't take the knight. He played a passive move, but considering the circumstances, he played the best move in the position, and that's queen to a3. Just retreating the queen and still staring at the e7 pawn, preparing to take it when knight takes e4. And of course, the point of the potential sacrifice was to take the e4 pawn, so Bobby removes the defender, knight takes e3, and he has to take with the b pawn just to keep attacking e7. And of course, not to lose another tempo by moving the queen when the knight takes e4. And now, once again, he could take either with the queen or with the bishop. If he takes with the queen, then simply rook to e8 would be winning. After queen takes, any discover check by the knight is completely winning, so he takes with the bishop. And after bishop takes e7, Bobby plays queen to b6. And now, after all of this has happened, the material is equal. but Bobby is just completely winning, and the position is so hard to play for white. His king is still stuck in the center, and there's nowhere to hide. First of all, taking the rook is just losing. He has no time to take the rook. Let me show you why. If bishop takes f8, then just bishop takes f8, gaining a tempo on the queen, and after queen to b3, just rook to e8. And you are once again threatening a discovery by the knight, whatever white does. If he takes the queen, you take, and after that, the king has no room to escape. It can't go to d2 because it's covered by the knight, and if it goes to e2, then any discovered check by the knight would at least win the rook. So taking doesn't work after queen to b6. Taking the rook doesn't work. Donald Byrne actually played bishop to c4, which this move once again doesn't really do anything. And Bobby simply continued with another remarkable sacrifice, or a potential sacrifice he took on c3. He played knight takes c3. And now Donald Byrne didn't take the knight. If he takes the knight, things would be horrible once again. So okay, let's say queen takes c3. Bobby would play rook a to e8, pinning the bishop to the king, and the bishop is now definitely lost. Let's say castles in this position, rook takes e7, then just rook to b1 would be the best move, queen to c7, rook f to e1, and the position would be lost for white, but at least sort of playable, even though, no, not playable, but better than what happened in the game. Another continuation after queen takes c3, rook a to e8, would be, after queen to c3 would be rook f to e8, just getting the second rook into play, and once again black would be winning. So after knight takes c3, white can't really take the knight. So he played bishop to c5, which once again is a very bad move, and taking the knight was perhaps better than bishop to c5, because after bishop to c5, Bobby simply plays rook f to e8 check, and after king to f1, bishop to e6, and after bishop takes b6, taking the queen, which was just offered, Bobby continues his game in such a strong fashion with the most beautiful series of attacking moves ever played in history of chess, definitely. A series of moves even more beautiful than the conception behind knight to a4 offering the knight. Okay, so now let's see what happens if white doesn't take the queen. The best move in this position was queen takes c3, just taking the knight, not taking the b6 queen. After queen takes c3, queen would take c5 because the pawn is pinned to the queen, and after d takes c5, bishop takes c3, and once again the material is equal. Black has the bishop pair and an extra pawn, but the position is playable, and white could have lasted for 10 or 15 more moves. However, after bishop e6 offering the queen, Donald Byrne takes the queen. And now the series of moves which follows is astonishing. First, of course, taking the bishop we check. Bishop takes c4 check. King goes to g1. And now just grabbing all the pieces from the board using his knight and his bishop as a very strong checking weapon. Knight to e2 check. King to f1, there is no other moves. Knight takes d4 check. Once again, there is no other moves. The king can never go to the e-file. It can only go back to g1. So king to g1. Once again, knight to e2 check. King to f1. Knight c3 check, attacking the rook. Once again, king to g1. And now not taking the rook, which is loose, but a takes b6, gaining a tempo on the queen. And in this position, queen to b4 was played. Rook to a4, attacking the queen, and in this position, it's completely lost. Whatever white does, the best try was to take the rook, but Donald Byrne took the knight. So now queen takes he took the pawn. Queen takes b6, and now after queen takes b6, Bobby Fischer simply takes the knight, takes the rook. Knight takes d1, and now h3, making some luft for his king, but there's no point to making luft in this position. Rook takes a2, attacking the f2 pawn. King to h2, knight takes f2, attacking the rook. Rook to e1, and Bobby accepts the trade, of course. Rook takes e1, and now queen takes d8 check. Bishop to f8, knight takes e1. And if you count the pieces, now it's knight and queen versus the bishop pair, the rook and the knight. But the king safety of white's king is so compromised that white can't do anything about getting checkmate, and checkmate is now almost unavoidable. And the way Bobby finishes the game now is brilliant, and the fact that he was only 13 when this game was played is inconceivable. And I'm not sure if there was ever an attacking game played at this level before or after. He continued with bishop to d5, attacking g2, knight to f3, knight to e4, queen to b8, trying to do whatever. I'm not sure what this move is doing. Perhaps he wants to take the b7 pawn. b5, Bobby defends it. h4, h5, blocking the path from for the white king to escape. Knight to e5, and now king to g7, safety first, not letting Donald Byrne get any counterplay. And now king to g1, trying to save the position, but now bishop to c5 check, king to f1, knight to g3 check, king to e1, knight to b4 check, king to d1, bishop to b3, knight to e2, king to b1, knight to c3 check, king to c1, and rook to c2 checkmate. And this combination of moves after bishop to c5 is such a great checkmating puzzle that it's actually a great practice calculation for checkmating your opponent. He did have 4 pieces though, and the queen and the knight aren't helping defend at all, so but still this combination is magnificent. Just how he uses and coordinates all of his pieces to bring the king into the corner and just deliver the final blow is amazing. So this was Bobby Fischer at 13, and of course what he did afterwards was amazing, but this is the game he's most famous for, apart from game 6 with in the Spassky match. So yeah, Donald Byrne, who was a very strong international master, he actually finished 4th in this tournament. Bobby Fischer was 9th. Got such a beating which he surely remembered for the rest of his life, and this game made Bobby a chess star immediately, and after this game everybody knew his name in the chess world. Okay, thanks very much for watching. I hope you liked this game, and I hope you haven't seen it before, and even if you did, I hope it helped and that you got some attacking ideas from the young genius Bobby Fischer. And thanks very much. Stay tuned for more chess. See you later. Bye.